Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity.
Valerie Woerner, I am so excited to have you on this episode of People in Transition. This is just going to be a great discussion, and I know that our listeners will get so much out of this. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Bob. I've loved your podcast, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Valerie, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, when I was quite young, I wanted to be a performer. I started singing solos in church before I was 3, and I loved dancing, so I just wanted to perform.
And what were the transition moments that occurred to you to get you from that picture of a performer as a child to where you're at today?
Well, as I went from single digits to double digits, I realized that very few people make it in those careers, and also that it takes earning money. So I started looking at my other skills, and I was very strong in math and science. And I was, in fact, skipped 2 years in high school. And I looked at ways I could have a challenging and interesting career and decided that was going to take education.
And what did you do with that education? How did you follow up on that?
I earned a BA in psychology and an MBA in finance from Ross Business School, both at the University of Michigan. And I started in banking. And by age 30, I became president of a manufacturing company, growing revenue from 3 million to 100 million over 10 years. Via new product development. I've saved a company with annual sales in excess of 100 million from bankruptcy, facilitated industry evolution, which is one of the things I love, taught at 2 universities, served on corporate and nonprofit boards, advised on M&A transactions, built and upgraded processing plants, and coached and mentored extensively. I found that my experience and education combine effectively to consistently deliver value with a focus on strategies, solutions, solace, and stakeholder benefit. You might think that I strive on variety, and I do. So that's why I've done a number of things.
I love that description of going from single to double digits in your age. I can't wait till we go from double digits to triple digits sometime in the futures. Thank you for that description, Valerie. So given all of that experience in lots of different roles and lots of different companies, you've seen people that have struggled with transitions. You've seen people that have been successful in those transitions. Any tools that you've seen that can be helpful to someone that is looking for a new job?
Yes. Well, there are firms that you can hire that provide aid and support during a transition, but the important work has to come from you. I'm an avid reader, so I read a lot of helpful books, and we can mention those later. But I also think you have to craft a targeted campaign to reach your goals. And the networking is critical. So many times we only network when we're in need of a new challenge. But I think it's so vital every day to spend a little bit of your time doing networking, because you not only reach out, but you have to nurture those relationships and really get to know people. Also, your colleges often assist their graduates. Ross has a terrific alumni career coach named Lisa Morgan, and she's helped me in a current transition. The contacts I made by working with her allowed me to actually be appointed to the Ross Alumni Board of Governors. I'm also a big fan of daily exercise because it's vital that you maintain physical health, but also emotional health. And one thing I found really helped me and helps many people is reaching out and helping others, sharing your talents. When you do that, it gives you such a good feeling. It helps others, and that increases your motivation. And those are things I think are helpful, Bob.
Valerie, you talked about networking, and for some, just hearing that word freaks them out, okay? They sit there going, I'm not a networker, I'm not a salesperson. What are you talking about? Describe networking and how can you get over that feeling, I guess?
There's a good book that might help. It's called Never Eat Alone and Other Secrets to Success, One Relationship at a Time. And it's by Keith Ferrazzi. And it would probably give you some helpful ideas. But I'll give you an example. It's hard to reach out to new people. I know that. But for example, in the last year, Lisa Clark at Next Level founded a group called A Seat at the Table. And she asked me and a couple of others to help her creating this. And it's a group for women's empowerment. And we've had a lot of fun. Next month's meeting is on negotiation. And she asked me who would be a terrific speaker. Well, I had read George Seidel's book, Negotiation. And he's a professor at University of Michigan. But he's in demand all over the world, and he's exceptional, and the book is terrific. And I thought he would be really terrific, so I'm going to write an email to him. And I crafted an email and told him how much I enjoyed the book. I had been a CEO with a lot of negotiation, but I learned from it that I was a Ross graduate. And 10 minutes later, he wrote back and said he'd be happy to be the speaker for our group on Zoom, even though he has commitments to speak all over the world and he gets paid for it. So what I mean is you can look on LinkedIn, you can find people you might have something in common with. You should look back to those who you've met, reach out to somebody you know who might know someone who could be helpful. It might be hard, but once you do it, you find that people are wonderful and you feel better, and it's often beneficial.
In your experience, what are some of the areas that you see people struggling with when they're between jobs and as they mount their job search campaign? What are some of the challenges that they have?
Well, often if you've lost your job, that can cause your confidence to diminish, Bob. And then it makes it more difficult and you tend to procrastinate. This often happens. And sometimes people start to watch the television or videos. They're not proactive. But what they need to remember is most of us have a lot of experience and we need to keep adding to that. And they have value. So they have to remember their magic. And if they do have a brand, it's time to refresh it. And if they don't, it's so important to create it. And I'm talking about a brand statement that's just a couple of sentences. And it's critical that it has three components. Who are you? What do you do? And how do you do it? I'll give you mine for an example. Strategic CEO and board leader who transforms businesses using both creativity and logic, utilizing left brain, right brain, and sandbox skills. So those are some things that might help.
I love the notion that we all have magic inside of us, and it's our job to make certain that others have the opportunity to see that magic. That's really a great idea. In your role, you've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes that have come across your desk. If you could give 2 suggestions to people on how they could make their resume better so that it would stand out from the stack of other resumes that the hiring manager is looking at, what would those 2 suggestions be?
One is to read one of my favorite books, which is Rebel Talent, written by Francesca Gino. She's a professor at Harvard. And you need to look at your novelty, curiosity, perspective, diversity, and authenticity, because these talents are pathways to engagement. And as you know, Bob, 70% of people who leave jobs do so because of bad managers and because of lack of engagement. So in your resume, you need to demonstrate these qualities, and you need that to become proficient and successful in a job. You know, when I've had students in college doing resumes, they would write things like, I organized a meeting. They were things that just don't impress, and I would work with them to change everything to action. You want actionable words. You want to show what a difference it made. You can have metrics. There are lots of good examples on the internet. Just don't make it that standard one that someone looking for a candidate is going to see 50 copies of.
Yeah, I tell my clients that every line under a job that they're describing, they should start that line with an action verb, because the hiring manager is not interviewing the position, they're interviewing you. And so you're going to want to show that action that you have taken.
That's excellent, Bob.
Let's say we've made it through the resume review, and we're now in a shorter stack of people that the company might be interested in. And in today's environment, because of COVID and volumes of resumes and so forth, probably that interview is either going to be a phone call or a Zoom meeting. What are the 2 or 3 suggestions, Valerie, that you'd make to someone who's going to be doing one of those telephone interviews or Zoom interviews to come across better?
You really need to do a lot of research about the company, look at evaluations on the company and jobs and what people who've been there have to say, look up the boss you'd be reporting to and any other people that you might be interfacing with, because nowadays there's so much you can learn from doing that. And also, you really need to develop excellent questions to ask them. And they need to be questions you really want to know about. You know, I've found as I look for board positions, I really come up with questions that I need to know and that I know will interest the owners of the company. So that's very critical. But the other thing is you have to be an excellent listener. One saying I've heard that I like is, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So make sure you really listen and you don't just talk endlessly.
Kind of a follow-up to that is that you might hear some things in the interview that doesn't fit with your values or interests. But I've oftentimes been told by people, Bob, any job is better than no job. How do you reconcile those two things, that this might be the wrong place for me, yet it's a job?
Well, I totally understand that people need a paycheck, Bob, but if we go back to that 70% of the employed are not engaged, you don't want to be one of those. You have to assess whether it's a good fit for both sides. If it's not going to be a good fit for you, you're not going to be motivated, not engaged, not happy. That could affect your personal relationships, your health, and you don't want to take it on for a short period until you find something else, because job hopping can really damage your career. So even though it's hard to wait for the one that is a right fit, from my perspective, it's the best choice.
In the interview, I'm the candidate and I have something bad in my past. Maybe a bad performance review. Maybe I was even terminated at some point in time. What do I do with that? What's my obligation in terms of talking through that? And more important, how do I get that out on the table, if at all, so that it's not something that is back in the closet for the future?
Good question. But it's so important to be honest in the interview. We all learn as we continue in our careers, and I'm always impressed when a candidate will own up to it, not make a long story out of it, not blame the boss or someone else in the company, but instead simply tell me what they learned from it and how they've grown.
Someone told me once, Bob, you need to take charge of your career. What is that line? You need to take charge of your career. What does that mean to you?
It's an interesting comment, and it's very important, I think, that we do take charge. And one of the differences that's been said between intelligent people who become the leaders in the company and those who stay in the middle manager ranks talks about their likability, their ability to listen, their ability to mentor others. It's a whole package of things and talents that if you don't have, you should learn, and you should always have a plan. I mean, it isn't the end all to simply get the job, but you have to create a path forward if that's your goal, and you have to know what's important to you, and you have to be authentic in that. And it's probably a little different answer for just about everyone, Bob.
You talked about a path or development. What's your advice on learning new skills while you're in transition? Is this a good idea, or should you just stay focused in on that job hunting?
Oh, it's an excellent idea. I'm a lifelong learner. I make a goal of reading over 100 books a year because there are so many good ones that come out. And I remember in one of my MBA finance classes when we were close to graduation, one of my favorite professors said, you've been spending endless hours reading, and some of you, when you graduate, will simply stop. But I'm going to encourage you to keep reading and keep learning. And that's essential to me. So, I take Coursera courses. I'm signed up for the Positive Leader at Ross. It's just essential. And, I do that with technology too, because granted, I'm not at the top of the game in technology. So if you don't do that, at some point you're going to fall behind. And I think it's no matter what you're doing, excelling, transitioning, I think it's vital.
Though you and I get no royalties on this, maybe you'll explain to our listeners what Coursera courses are all about and how to find those.
Oh, Coursera you can find by looking up Coursera, spelled just as it sounds. And they have many courses, and many of them are free. If you want a certificate, there's a nominal fee to be paid. And some of the professors are excellent, and they're from top colleges and very worthwhile. So you just have to go through them, see what will help you progress your skills and what will work in your time frame. But there are so many to choose from, and they don't just start at the beginning of each semester. They're sort of like continuous. There's always something that's starting.
Earlier, you talked about technology and the use of technology in your transition. How have you coached people to use LinkedIn or other social media tools to support them in their job search?
I'm a member of Private Directors Association, and especially during COVID, we've had endless webinars, and some of them have been on LinkedIn and how to maximize your usage. And I always recommend those because I think if you listen to the experts, that's a good way to learn about it. And there are other sources too. I simply use PDA because I'm a member, but there are many sources. And, if you don't do the webinars or whatever you're using, YouTube, you're not going to learn new things.
Do you think transition management is somehow different today than it was 10 years ago?
It's different in the sense that we have more tools to help us, Bob. You can get so much more information online than you used to be able to 10 years ago. And I do think that there's a greater use of social media, some of which may be positive, not all of it. And I just think that it moves a little faster. But in some respects, I'm doing similar things in transition that I did 10 years ago, such as the networking and the personal contacts and upgrading skills and things like that.
You talked about your MBA program and the Alumni Association being a good source of connections and support. How do you use all of your professional organizations to your advantage when you're in your job search?
There are lots of opportunities. For example, a seat at the table. They asked me to be the first speaker on my CEO journey. That went over very well. The leader of the company has taken a real personal interest in me. I've helped her with a lot of things. She proposes me for different opportunities. Not all of them I'm interested in. And of course, I always look for that right fit. I've helped her get her first board position. So there's a lot of give and take if you're in a professional organization or one that helps other people. I mentor some professional individuals, and they also have mentioned opportunities to me. Ross has been extremely helpful because the alumni counselor there and I have become really good friends. So there's a benefit of a friendship, but I've learned so much more about Ross, and I was volunteer for their annual leadership crisis challenge where I served as judge and board member. And I was so impressed with the quality that went into creating it and the benefits it provided to the students that were involved. And also we do alumni in residence where students sign up to meet with us and they can ask whatever questions or help they want. And there's no feedback to their teachers or anything like that. It seems like whatever you get involved with, Bob, you help people and they help you. PDA has been wonderful because they come up with a lot of board opportunities for companies. And just in the last 6 months, I've been a finalist for 5 different companies, and that is how I've gotten one of my board positions. So there are a lot of benefits from being involved in different groups.
What are some of the struggles or setbacks that you've seen individuals deal with in their job search? And how do you coach them in working through those setbacks?
One of the struggles I've seen is for married people, and sometimes the spouse, unfortunately, is not supportive. And this can be because of a concern over the finances of a family, and that is a difficult situation. Sometimes when the spouse is willing, I've met with them. My degree in psychology at times is helpful in getting them to understand a bigger picture. I also like to put them in touch with people that I think can be helpful to them. I have sometimes seen a person with a college degree who has good abilities become depressed and need counseling. Not my counseling, but professional counseling. And sometimes they even turn to an hourly job for the interim. And sometimes those end up being 10 and 12-hour shifts. They get very tired. And then you have to do your best to try to get them back on a good track. And I find if you can engage a few individuals who might be helpful, they can often pick up their spirits and continue in a positive way.
What do you coach your colleagues that are going through transitions? What should they do that middle of the night for them when those gremlins of fear and doubt and depression get into your head and those gremlins tell you, you're not good enough, you're too old, you're too slow, you're too whatever, and that you've been an imposter all of these years. And now that you've lost your job, see, they found me out and I'll probably never work again. How do you deal with that?
That's difficult. If they can't get back to sleep, I encourage them to get up, listen to podcasts such as the one that you offer, call a dear friend who's going to pick up their spirits, start writing out a brand statement or plans or a list of people that they would ideally like to network with, not a list that they plan to contact, but then on the next day to do some research and see if they know people who know those people on the list. It's just so important to find ways to get them to feel better. And Bob, I'm sure you've had lots of days where someone will give you a compliment and it just lights up your day. So it's important that they get out of the house, whether it's to go get exercise, to go to a library, whatever it is, go for a walk. They might encounter someone who's going to say something positive to them, and authentic compliment can really turn a day around. It's a difficult circumstance, but you need to, instead of just focus on what you're worried about, if you think you're too old, well, learn something. Go exercise, get with your friends, teach someone something, and all of a sudden, you'll feel so much better about yourself.
I had a client once that I learned something from as the coach, and they did two things. Number one, they got rid of all their toxic friends that they had, that during that transition was not the time for that Debbie Downer to be a part of their circle. They were struggling enough without that person and only had those people that were upbeat and motivational and can do in their inner circle. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was he created a gratitude folder, and it was positive notes that he'd received from people, positive reviews, positive sayings and experiences and so forth. And when he found himself slipping into that dark hole, would open up that folder and kind of wash himself over with those positive experiences. Thought that was two really great ideas.
They are excellent. And I keep a gratitude journal because it's amazing how much impact some comments people make will have. And, if I have a day when I'm just wondering about something or feeling a little tired, I look at that and it just picks you up.
Valerie, as someone who has for years read 100 books a year, as you have, this is going to be a tough question, but any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone who is going through their own job transition? And you've mentioned a number of them already, but any others?
One I really like, and we used it in our seat at the table, is Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And the title is a little deceiving, but it has so many really good tips in it. That's by Lois Frankel. And I like The Startup of You, Adapt to the Future, Invest in Yourself, and Transform Your Career by Reid Hoffman, and Start Something That Matters by Blake McCoskey. I also really like Half the Sky, and that's about women in the world who are so underprivileged and people who are reaching out to educate and make their lives better. And that's a really excellent book. It's written by two reporters from the New York Times. It's a really good book for those people, especially who are interested in nonprofits. And even though that's not my primary expertise, it's made such an impression on me. It's caused me to be engaged in some efforts that I previously hadn't been aware of.
If our listeners only remember three things as they go through their own job transition, what are those three things that you want them to take with them based on what we've covered today?
I think, Bob, I would say learn to network with others, create your plan and your timeline, make sure your brand statement is up to date, help others, exercise daily, lifelong learning, learn new skills. I know this is more than three, but I'm going to finish with one of my favorite quotes, and it's from Sheryl Sandberg. If you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask which seat, just get on.
I actually love that quote, and at my office, I have that taped up somewhere. So thank you for sharing that. Valerie, I know that I can speak for all of our listeners that this has been such an informational discussion today. You gave a number of really great tips and ideas in terms of how to go about the job transition, how to make it go more fun, but effective. Thank you for being so open and candid in terms of your experiences as well, so that we can learn from it. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Bob. It's been my pleasure. And you are such an outstanding and experienced coach and mentor. And I appreciate all the help you provide to so many out there.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully or without too many battle scars, survive their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.